Thank you all for joining us in our continuing workshops this summer on strategies for our journalism students and beyond. And this is our next to last one. The last one is August, Barbara, when is it again? August 12th, and that's just before the semester starts. And that's kind of a round robin on a discussion on the situation with school and classes and things like that. It's kind of an open mic. But this one is specifically catered to students who are interested in the legal field, or journalism students. Curiously, though, I've had experience with attorneys who have done just the opposite. They went into the legal field. Attorneys who went into the journalism field. So that occurs very often too. But consider this kind of an overview of the legal industry, the kind of things that you want to leave our students with in terms of some strategies and tips. Anybody who wants to make a jump, life and careers is all about redefining yourself. So this is a very good opportunity about talking about those strategies. So why don't we start with, we have 4 panelists today, and I'll introduce each one, and they can tell us about what they do and some of the strategies they use and why they made the switch from journalism to legal. So I'm gonna choose Leah first because she's on top of my screen to the left. Leah, welcome. Thanks so much. Leah is a 2014 graduate, and she had some an interesting career so far. She was an ADA, an assistant district attorney for the Nassau County District Attorney for a while, and I hope you talk to us about that experience. That must have been very rich. And she's now an associate attorney for the New York Workers' Compensation Litigation Defense, and I imagine she's extremely busy with everything that's going on. As far as at Stony Brook, she was a transfer student from Nassau Community College. Her concentration was broadcast journalism, and she reported from WUSB News, and she was an executive producer at Stony Brook Newsbreak. She also, with her career at SBU, she received a Media Service Award, and she also interned at CBS News as a broadcast marketing intern, working with CBS Evening News, CBS Sunday Morning, as well as freelancing for Hearst, and managing some Pinterest pages for some pretty high-end magazines. So there's a lot of rich experience there, Leah. So welcome, and I'm sure everybody is anxious to hear what it's like in terms of your daily responsibilities, but also talk a little bit about why you made the transition, what skills you carried forward from your journalism studies here at Stony Brook, and how those skills have helped you in your current position. So
I actually didn't think about law school really until probably my second year at Stony Brook, when my dad suggested that I look into law school following graduating from Stony Brook. And I actually think that was a good suggestion, given the fact that I'd always wanted to be an advocate for people, always wanting to affect change. And I thought that, journalism was obviously a good route for that in terms of telling people's story who, otherwise wouldn't have a voice. And so when I went to law school, wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to practice, and kind of fell into the criminal law track, which led me to the DA's office. But I think that everything that I learned from the School of Journalism has helped me in my career, especially being a broadcast major. I litigate a lot. I'm always in front of a judge. When I was at the DA's office, I was quite literally in front of people every single day. Trial work, the broadcast skills that I learned kind of went hand in hand in terms of voice inflection and how to just speak to people, really, especially with the experiences that I got from learning man on the street interviews and things like that. And with respect to sort of what my day-to-day looks like right now, I defend employers like Best Buy, Macy's, Apple. Those are some of the clients that my firm has in defense of workers' compensation claims. So really, it's just a lot of client contact, going to hearings in defense of these claims, essentially to stop the bleeding in terms of how much we actually have to pay out. And most of the time, we're getting very messy claims, and that's why they're always litigated, because you definitely do have people that are trying to get over, I guess you could say. And it is a claimant-friendly, by nature, type of law. So really, I'm just doing a lot of legal analysis with respect to looking at medical reports and settlement negotiations, and quite literally everything you could think of that a lawyer might have to do.
I can imagine that the research skills that you acquired as a journalist, as a student journalist, probably help you in your tracking down some of those medical details and others. Is that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think besides the research skills, I honestly have to say the objectivity that was sort of instilled in us has definitely helped, because it's allowed me to kind of see between the weeds, I guess you could say, when it comes to looking at materials, because I'm able to look at it. You have to look at it at both sides, and you can't be so, either plaintiff or claimant oriented. I'm sorry, plaintiff or defense oriented. You kind of have to be able to have the mindset for both and be very objective about things, which is something that when I was in ADA, I found that there were numerous colleagues that I think had a hard time looking at things objectively, which is something that, you need to do in terms of advancing what the criminal justice system is being objective.
Yeah, that's a very good point, to have those skills. I'm interested in your jump into as an ADA. How difficult was that? And how many ADAs are there in Nassau County?
Oh my, I think I worked with, because I dealt with misdemeanor crimes, so just lower level crimes. I hadn't gotten up to what we call felony land just yet. There were probably approximately 30 of us. I know that my caseload ranged from 150 to 300 cases, depending on how many, as we would say, bodies we had, helping with manning the court staff. On the county court level, there were definitely over 30 AEAs within the office. The jump wasn't too difficult, I would say. I think that being in front of the camera for 3 years as a broadcast journalism major made it very easy to make the transition in having to speak in front of a judge, speak on the record, speak in front of a gallery full of defendants that were waiting, speak in front of a jury panel when choosing a jury. So I think I definitely had a leg up in terms of some of my colleagues who don't have that background, and there were quite a few colleagues that I mentored in terms of just getting comfortable being on the record and speaking in front of people, which is difficult for many.
Yeah, the speaking skills also translate into an array of other industries. So I think you make a good point that speaking classes or broadcast really gives you some really good foundation in terms, especially for what you did, because you're constantly in front of the judge and speaking to juries. So honestly, I watched litigators when I was a reporter, litigators all the time, and I was just so impressed by, they do this day in and day out, and it really is impressive for them to do that. So and tell us bring us back to after you graduated, your decision. You said it was your dad who basically inspired you to go into law school. Was it a tough decision, or?
Well, absolutely. It definitely was, because I more or less kind of had like a job offer at CBS, and I knew that pursuing law would definitely probably take me down a path very far from the ability to sort of go back into journalism, because I knew that I'd have to concentrate on that. And a lot of the skills that I'd built up in terms of being a line producer with Stony Brook Newsbreak and everything that came with that would definitely get rusty. So it was not an easy decision, but I felt in terms of what I wanted to do long term, it would assist me in being more of an advocate for people and helping and really getting in the trenches, because I think with journalism, it's a very hands-off approach. You know, like I said, you know, it's about objectivity and getting both sides and reporting accurately. And I wanted to be more active. I wanted to do more than I think journalism could actually do for me. So I chose that route, just going to law school. And actually, when I was looking at leaving the DA's office, I had applied to numerous journalism jobs trying to get back into the field. Because I wasn't, you kind of have to take a step back and think, this is my dream, you know, to work for CBS News and do broadcast journalism. Is it still something that I'm looking to do now? Obviously, I ended up at a new firm and I stayed within the legal field. But I think it was the right decision long-term that I made.
So, and I'm going to ask all the other panelists this, how tough was law school?
Law school's hard. Law school is hard. I think you're not going to find an easy law school anywhere. And when I was looking at law school, I had to think about.
You're freezing up, Leah.
Because if I was going to suffer, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
If I was going to suffer, if I was going to suffer through law school, I wanted to suffer with people that I liked and that I'd have a good time with. So okay. I don't think you're going to find an easy law school anywhere.
And talk about some opportunities that you must be keen to, some opportunities that are specifically built for a journalist who wants to make the leap, right? So are there any job opportunities that you see in your field that journalists may, for instance, social media or communications like Christina's in? Are there any job openings now that are opening up for journalists who want to make the switch?
I think in terms of marketing and communications, there are probably more openings, but what I've noticed, because I had recently got my job in May, I believe I got my offer at the end of April. And I think because of COVID, it was very difficult to find jobs, primarily because no one really knew how to train people, I guess you could say, when everyone was working from home. And so what I noticed was they wanted people with experience. And if they had to train you, it was just, they were fighting an uphill battle that they didn't believe that they could, overcome. Luckily, my firm managed to take me on and trained me completely from home. But I think that COVID has definitely changed the job market for the field of law, for sure.
Okay, interesting. We live in strange times, but we also, I guess, the opportunities arise too of strange times. So, Leah, thank you so much. I'm going to move to my next panelist here on the right, Francesca. Francesca, thanks so much for joining us. Francesca, Francesca is studying for the bar exam, and she's a law student, and she is in line for an associate position, I guess, in intellectual property at Wilkie Farr & Gallagher in New York City, which is a pretty large law firm, right? So, so tell us a little bit about your transition from journalism. At SBU, you were the arts and entertainment editor at the Statesman. So that's quite the leap from arts and entertainment editor to law. So what made you make the decision to go into law school, and what was that like? And also tell us about your future plans with the firm.
Yeah, so I brought this because I thought it was kind of humorous. It's a little show and tell. When I was younger, I went to a, it has the date, in 2004, I went to take your daughter to work day, and they had us say what we wanted to be. And I said, a lawyer, if you could see there. And honestly, I don't really remember doing that. I don't remember making that decision. I'm sure a lot of people say they go to law school because they have been told by family members that they're good at arguing. I know I've been told that, but I always knew that I liked journalism. I liked the creative aspects, kind of what lends itself to arts and entertainment. And when I think it was the first semester at Stony Brook, I took media law with Carolyn Levin, and finally I was like, this is how these two things combine. This is how I can do both. And I'm very achievement oriented, and like since that day, I remember like I got out of class, I went over to the Wong Center and I called my mom, and I was like, I'm going to law school, and she's like, I thought you committed to journalism. It's like, I am. We're going to be a media lawyer. And it's kind of been that since then. What were your questions?
So some of the questions were, the bar exam, number one, you're studying for that. Number two, your future position at Gallagher in terms of IP. I know that's a huge area these times. And also speak a little bit more about the kind of skill sets that you found useful from journalism translated into legal.
Yeah, sure. So I think in Professor Levin's class, she did talk about copyright and trademark a little bit. So that for some background, IP is separate from the work that is considered media law. Technically, that's like constitutional law, defamation, privacy. So it's kind of torts. So like media law is a very mosaic type of law, like it's not just one type of thing. So when I went to law school, I decided to go to IU because IU had
you're frozen. Okay, that's better.
Communications Commission. So that was part of. Okay, yeah, sorry. I don't know at what part that I froze, but IU had really good connections with the communications field. So I thought that was a really good way to kind of combine those interests. And while I was there, I did some work, like research work for the professors at the media school while I was in law school. So at Wilkie Farr & so I guess, yeah, during law school, I realized that in order to get into media law, I'd have to be pretty well versed in not only like the constitutional aspects, the torts aspects, the privacy aspects, and IP, which is copyright and trademark in terms of what media lawyers would do. So I just tried to get a really rich background in all of those things and just expose myself to pretty much every opportunity I could. Something that someone had told me that if I wanted to go into media, I did a lot of networking. And one of the pieces of advice someone told me was to continue writing. So I got a column at the Indiana Lawyer, and I just wrote about whatever I was working on. It was quarterly, but just to keep my feet wet that way as well. And yeah, so at Wilkie, I will be doing intellectual property. I've worked on everything from copyright, trademark, and patents there. I never ever thought I'd be in a situation to work on patent work, but there is some patent work you can do without a hard science background. I just, in terms of the experience I have on more of like the journalism side, while I was there last summer, I did a project on behalf of NBC. And I also did a project about like the copyright implications of linking to external news sources on like a website that is yours. So basically linking to content that's not your own, and if there is any copyright implications. So I'll be doing that. I'll be doing kind of unlike Leah. I think I'll be in the courtroom less. I think that's something that happens when you're at a bigger firm. But I believe since I'll be in a smaller department, I'll get more hands-on litigation, but also I'll be doing transactional work. I think the right side is a bit more transactional in nature. The future goal for me would be to work maybe directly in-house at a news organization and like advise journalists that way, but it's a step-by-step process I've learned. One of the biggest skills I think that I was expecting to take with me from journalism school into the legal world, I don't know about you, Leah, but everyone told me that being a journalist would make writing so much easier. But I found that like, I didn't think that was true. I thought that writing for journalism was much more exciting and much more interesting. But something kind of going along what Leah said, I think the biggest advantage I have, or I had over like my classmates, was that I was comfortable talking to people. And like, I always, in Stony Brook, I always told my friends who were not journalism majors, I was like, you can take your book, you can go to class, you can study, and like your grade is doing those things. but my grade is dependent on talking to other people and getting them to talk to me. And I kind of feel like that's similar with the legal profession. Like you need to get people to open up to you and want to work with you. I feel like that's for your colleagues and your clients. So I think that was my biggest advantage going into law school.
Francesca, you had some pretty good, like Leah, experience before you went into law school. I guess you were interning, I guess, at the assignment desk of NBC, Queen's Ledger, and you also did some writing for some newspapers that cover the legal industry. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you're smart to think maybe down the road you may want to combine, your experience with that, with your experience coming up with at Wilkie. So you may in the future maybe transform yourself again, into like you said, media relations. So I think that's pretty smart. So it's interesting that the writing. I was going to ask you guys about writing, whether that the writing helped you in your field, but it's interesting that you say that that it's a lot more strict and formal, I guess, in the legal industry. Is there any chance at all that we can teach lawyers how to do plain English?
I mean, I do think there's a benefit. I guess I could somewhat take back what I said. I think there is a benefit with being comfortable writing often and writing a lot, and that does translate into like being better prepared for law school. But I think as in terms of like interpersonal skills, I think that was the best thing journalism could have ever done for me.
Can I chime in? I think for me, I'm also in IP. I do trademark copyright. And this is my personal experience, and not to take away from what they're saying. I think writing was like the number one thing that I took into law. I think on a number of levels, organizationally, figuring out how to tell a story, which is important in litigation when you're doing a case, even when you're just trying to convince the other side that you have the better of the argument just to get a settlement or what have you. And also finding, for lack of a better word, sound bites from cases. So if you're writing a brief, you're pulling quotes from case law, and finding those bits and finding a way to weave those into what you're writing. I think a lot of that came directly from my journalism training. So for me, I think that training was really helpful in writing.
Yeah, good points. All good points. So Francesca, anything else you want to share with us? I know you're studying for the bar, and I had a niece who was also studying for the bar, and she showed me some questions, and let me tell you, it was quite the challenge. How do you study for the bar? I mean, is that like studying like for Jeopardy or something? I mean, how do you study for the bar?
So you can choose to do it however you want. I think the most traditional route would be to sign up for a course.
Okay.
And my course is online. I'm kind of nervous about having an online course because I thought like I need to be taught by a person, like in person. But I just like they have assignments and videos, and like you write essays and you take like practice questions. I found it pretty manageable. Early on, they said that you have to treat it as something that you get to do, not something you have to do. So I've been trying to have that mindset. And I can't say I've hated it, but I also know that I can't say my experience is typical. So it hasn't been too bad. Something else I wanted to mention is that for people, I mean, this is more media law specific, but I kind of thought going into this that I was a journalism major. I have all kinds of news outlets. I'm very passionate. I care about it. I thought I'd have a super easy time getting a media law job. And I think it's an important field. I think it's, there are jobs in the field, but I think it's pretty competitive. And I think not that I haven't done everything I can to stand out, but I think like anyone who is interested in doing media law specifically, like it's a climb. And I think it's a commitment, and it's something that you have to be very intentional about if you want to end up doing media law.
Interesting. How about some any job opportunities that you think are new to the field that some journalism students may be interested in?
I'm not necessarily sure if it's new to the field, but earlier this summer, I participated in the Student Press Law Center. They had a Media Law and Policy Institute to help like train future media lawyers. And we spoke to a couple of lawyers who first like practiced more traditionally at a firm and then went in-house. And one of the women who spoke, she was the first in-house general counsel for BuzzFeed. And at that point, they hadn't had a lawyer prior to that. And she was talking about how like she navigated doing that role. And like she didn't even have an office. So she said she would just sit in the newsroom and make herself available. So I think like at outlets, I do think it is very expensive for an outlet, unless they're pretty large, to have a dedicated lawyer. But I think positions like that are very important. And I think the organizations are seeing that they need it more and more. And we also, in that program, we spoke to journalists and they said, like, well, journalists often push back at the things lawyers say, like they recognize how essential they are and how much they need their help in making sure that stories are appropriate for publication. So I think that's maybe not a new position, but definitely a position that's not going anywhere. And I think people who care are needed for those jobs.
Any other positions that that you think is applicable to some of the skills that our journalism students have outside of being an attorney, like Christina's communications specialist? Are there more openings now in terms of social media or marketing or things like that?
I'm not too knowledgeable about that, but I would say, so at my firm last summer, I was like most of the people who dealt with us were the recruiters, and I can't help but feel like a past journalism.
Oh, I think you're frozen again. There you go.
About interpersonal skills. So I think, oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that I think someone with journalism skills would be really good for a recruiter position at like perhaps a law firm or something like that.
Oh.
Because I think there's a lot of interpersonal skills involved, and that is like one of the best assets I got from my journalism education.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good tip. Francesca, thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
We move on to Ray. Ray Ortiz, how are you, sir?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Ray Ortiz was the sports editor at the Stony Brook Independent. He's a graduate of 2011, and he is now a paralegal at the law offices of Karen Lawrence, which is the staff counsel for the Allstate Insurance Company. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about paralegals and how vital they are to the legal industry structure, and also what it takes to get into that field. How tough is it? How busy are you guys? I know from experience, my wife is the marketing director for a large law firm here on Long Island, and the paralegals at her firm are extremely, extremely busy. So I'm sure you have the same experience there. So tell us a little bit about that. And also, what made you decide to jump from your journalism studies to law?
Sure. So the paralegals, I would say they're really important, mostly because we handle a lot of things for attorneys that I wouldn't necessarily say they're easy or anything, but they're just things that the attorneys handling cases shouldn't have to spend their time doing, because they're doing the bigger picture stuff. What I'm doing is a little bit more ground level. So for instance, at my job, I'm a motions paralegal. So I'm taking care of motions where I'm coming in towards the end of the case, where there are things that have happened in the earlier parts of the case. And for instance, if, let's say, I'll give a specific example, someone has an accident, they go get treatment, and now the treater, the provider, is trying to sue Allstate for the money. There are steps that both the provider and the patient have to go through. If those are missed, then Allstate is going to deny that claim, and it's my job to put the motions together to get that claim denied. And those are things where, a lot of our attorneys are working on trials. They're working on interviewing patients for claims, and that's all time-consuming stuff. What I'm doing is pretty much by the book. so they shouldn't have to be worrying about that. That's where I come in. As far as how I got into it, I was trying my way in journalism, and really the driving factor for me, I was always interested in law. I went to college thinking about law, but I fell in love with journalism. Really, it was financial for me. Where I was working, it was just a pretty low paying job. And I wasn't making a ton of money. I was looking for other opportunities, wasn't finding anything much better. And quite frankly, the job I was doing, they were asking me to essentially create clickbait and get online traffic, which wasn't really what I wanted to do. I didn't feel good about it. And I felt like there was no growth for me. So I decided, these are skills that I could do. Unlike our other panelists here, I didn't have the stomach for law school. So I said, I'm trying to, and I was also at a stage where I was trying to get married and move out of my parents' house. Obviously, that's a step back. If you go to law school and have to pay for all that. So I decided to go for a paralegal certificate, which took me about 6 months. I went to Pace University for it while I was working. It took night classes. And then after that, I just found my way into a smaller law firm, exposed me to a ton of different aspects of things. And after about a year there, also wasn't a great experience. So even if you go into law, you're going to pay your dues somehow. After that, I was lucky enough to make a connection and get hired at Allstate. And to tell you the truth, I was I guess somewhat qualified to be working there. I definitely had a connection that helped me get it. But really, I just sold myself on most of the things that I learned from journalism to get that job. So
Explain.
Sure. I mean, I was only working for a year before I was hired at this law firm. They wanted several years of experience. So, I mean, I couldn't really compete there, but I pretty much just sold them on the fact that I know how to write on deadline. And even though the writing style is different, like Francesca said, for what I was doing, a lot of the stuff I learned was great because I was pretty much selling them on how I could get through copy and I could clearly and concisely communicate things. A lot of what I write is not meant to be wordy or verbose because they're basic oppositions or replies, and judges have to read them and they don't want to read a million pages. They want you to get to the point at these types of things because in these courts, it's civil court and they're just running through case after case after case. If I'm handing them 50 pages, they're not going to be happy and they're not even going to read it, honestly. So that helped, as well as the fact that, like Francesca said, the interpersonal things. I got there and I told them, listen, I may not have as much experience as some other people are going to apply to this, but trust me, I'm not afraid to ask questions. I wouldn't have gotten through journalism without asking a million questions, dumb ones, smart ones, whatever. If it sounds dumb, that's okay, because I'm going to ask, and I'd rather ask a dumb question than do my job wrong. So things like that, reacting on the fly, as well as just being kind of tenacious. Part of my job is calling other firms or getting answers from people, and I need to get it done quickly. And someone gives you a contact. That contact doesn't answer your email. A lot of people lay down. I know that that's not okay. So, the different things that I've had to do chasing down stories in J school kind of translates here, because now it's 2 days, something's due. I'm able to just call around, piece my way to get to someone who can give me an answer and, ultimately get the job done and not come back with an excuse.
Yeah, no, those are all good points because a lot of students, including myself when I was in J school back in the dinosaur days, don't really put together the fact that there are a multitude of skills that we are good at. Phone interviews, right. Like Leah pointed out, being in front of people, asking questions, tracking people down, writing. Getting things done on deadline, all that stuff is crucial in a multitude of industries. So especially your industry. I'm interested in the.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more thing to that too.
Yeah.
So another thing too, with regards to the writing, at least where I'm working, where it's a lot of motions and stuff, I'm not the first person there who's been doing them. There's templates for just about anything, which is huge. I mean, you go to any law firm and you're going to be working off templates. However, most cases aren't always the same. A lot of cases are going to have different variations of what happened here, or this step was missed, but this is the reason we're still doing a motion. And sometimes, you get a template, but it's not going to fit. And we have to figure out how to basically rewrite sections, add things, know what to take out of a motion. And that kind of stuff is something that you become very good at the J school. So that's part of what I would say is, at least someone like me, if you're not necessarily aspiring as high as to become an attorney, but you want to get into the legal field for the stability like I did, that's kind of how you have to sell yourself, because you can give someone clips of articles you've written, they may not get it from what, they may not get it, but you have to be able to, when you're in an interview, sort of highlight that about yourself. Like, you're pretty much someone who can overcome whatever's going to come your way in the process of getting your motion done, or whatever it is that they're asking you to do. Sometimes there's a lot of different things you can do, but it's really like about being adaptable and knowing that I'm going to be able to figure it out on the fly better than someone else. Just because they went to law school, that does not mean they're going to be able to do that better than I can, because I come from journalism.
All good points. Can you go through briefly a little bit what the paralegal getting a certificate entails? You did that online, and what it's like, and the kind of things that you needed to do to be certified?
Yeah, I mean, it could seem intimidating, I guess, but for me, it wasn't very difficult. It was just a matter of, it's like going to college, really. You just show up and do the work, and you'll get it. Because I signed up with PACE to do 2 nights a week. There's other types. You can do longer classes and do it shorter. You can do it longer. I had a 6-month course, and I just went there and went through the various classes that they give. They give homework, you do the homework, and you pass the tests, and then you have a certificate. And you don't even really necessarily need a certificate, but most jobs are not going to hire you without one unless you know someone there, to be honest. So it's helpful.
Oh.
And for me, it gives you a basic understanding of different fields that is really useful for at least when you get your first job, because you don't want to go in completely blind. Some paralegal jobs are very clerical, and I guess you could get by there, but to do something like I'm doing, you really do need that certificate. You need that that grounding.
So there are paralegals, I guess, without being certified, right? I guess
absolutely. And a lot of them are older, because now I think it was easier in years past to be able to get a certificate. Now it's a lot more competitive. So without a certificate, you're probably going to be dead in the water. But it's really not that, it's not that difficult to get. You just got to sign up for the course, and it sets you back a lot less than, a law school degree will. Lower your ceiling, but it sets you back a lot less.
Yeah. Can you get a job, let's say, as a clerk at a law firm, and then take paralegal classes in order to, grow with the business? Is that possible?
I would imagine it is possible. I'm not sure. That wasn't my process for it, but I went into it with no connections, so that wasn't really an option for me. But yeah, I would imagine that you could do that.
Right. But
I know at my job, they also will. Now that I'm working there, if I did want to go to law school, they will contribute to helping me, financially, to helping me get those courses done.
That's an important point. Thank you for that. Okay, good. Anything else you want to add before we move on, or?
I know that you had asked us about what certain kind of drawbacks could be, which it is important, I think, to know what the downsides could be. I would say, for one, at least what I'm doing, I like what I'm doing, but it can be pretty repetitive, and it's definitely less exciting than reporting on different things. I'll occasionally get a fun detail in one of my cases that's unusual, and I'm like, oh, I can do something different. That's cool, I guess, but it's not going from story to story or chasing down that kind of stuff. So it could be a little less interesting, I'd say, especially after you've done it for a while.
Right.
And it's also funny. We're journalists, so no one here is afraid to work, but there is a risk of overwork and burnout. I worked for a smaller firm. My first job, it was for a year, and there was only 5 or 6 employees. I was one of 2 paralegals, and it was my first job, and
Wow.
they did all different types of law. So pretty much it would be like, you know, if you started a class by saying, you know, here's how you're giving me an example of a lead. You talk about it for 5 minutes. You don't come back to it. There's no homework. And then at the end, you're going to give me a final and it's all leads. You know, that's the kind of stuff that happens. There's times where you're working, you know, till 10, 11 o'clock at night. And that's just the way it is at those smaller firms. So, and that's where you're going to probably have to start out. So, you know, it can be a grind. So it's not something that I would say you should take lightly, but, you know, if you're willing to work, you know, it's like anything else, you can do it.
Okay, thank you for that. How closely do you work with the attorneys in writing the motions?
Very closely. I mean, they look at everything I've done, and I'm fortunate enough that the attorneys I work with they're really good at giving me input. And they actually, a lot of times they appreciate what I do because, you know, sometimes they'll just give me things, and a lot of times I will just do my thing with it in terms of cutting things out, saying I don't need that. And sometimes they'll actually even give me some of their things to edit, which I thought was weird, but it happens. And they really appreciate that my ability to like really write clearly and concisely. I would say the number one thing anyone trying to do to highlight is tell them that you can be concise and direct. That is like the number one thing I took from all of our classes. Like if you leave Stony Brook journalism school, you know how to cut and be concise, and that is what they want to hear.
Okay. Well, that's good. Thank you so much for. Go ahead.
So Ray hit on so many things that like just popped up memories from the J school. One thing I will say, the accuracy F and the Kenneth Star. Yeah. I swear that that scarred me so much of just being accurate, even if you like misspell that it has traveled with me through law school, through the DA's office. Even now, I will read through things a million times to make sure that everything is grammatically correct, that, you know, everything is spelled right, because what that's really teaching you is just professionalism and being able to be meticulous with your work and showing that there's attention to detail. And I know on a more personal note, my paralegal is the person that keeps my head screwed on straight. Without her, like, I don't think that we could be a very efficient team. And so I really do commend Ray on being a paralegal because, you know, without him, and other paralegals, the firm can't run as it should. And in addition to that, I know that with respect to being concise, my team leader, we call them team leaders, but he's a partner. Whenever I go in front of him, he wants a pitch. He's like, pitch me what you're going to say to the judge, right? And like, that's what we did as journalism majors. Like we had to, you know, pitch to the editor what this story is going to be about within, you know, 5 sentences or less. If you can't do that, then you're going to have to go back and really think about what you're trying to say or get out of this story, or in this case, what the case is really about. So there are definitely a lot of things now that I'm thinking of, you know, what everyone's been saying, that as a journalism major, I almost think you can go into really any field because it gives you such practical foundational skills to be very successful if you have the drive. I feel like journalists just naturally have that drive, you know, to go after what you want. I know, just thinking back to a trial I once had early last year, there was a witness that was missing, and I did everything within my power to find this witness so that he could come and testify. And we had just started the trial. I had no idea where he was, but it's similar to hunting down sources, right? I had to really use all types of resources that I could to find this person. Luckily I did, you know, but again, when I was going through that, I was thinking back to what I learned in journalism school. So there definitely is a strong tie-in between journalism and the law.
And
yeah, thanks so much for the accuracy F thing. I think I'll use that clip for my 350 class next.
I brought up the accuracy F in my interview. I thought it would impress them to tell them that I never got one. So. Which I'm sure Professor Selma will be shocked that I never got even one.
There you go. There you go. I guess it works, huh? But it works
does
later
work.
on. Very good. Let's move on. Thank you, Ray, so much for that. Thank you, and Leah, thank you.
I just
Christine,
have to say, I
go
think
ahead.
I'm going to have to send a note to Paul Schreiber, who's now retired. Let him know that the accuracy F lives on in your hearts.
Get that
Yeah,
clip
I know.
and send it to Paul, because he's going to love that.
Yeah.
Christine Powell, Shea, a graduate of SBU 14, and you're a communications specialist at Cooley, which is a large, it's an international firm, correct? Cooley? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're the content coordinator and the general assignment reporter at previously Law 360 and a news assistant at Law 360. And at SBU, you were the managing editor at The Statesman. And prior to that, assistant news editor and a staff writer. And you're a member of the J School Advisory Board, very important position, and web editor for the J School as well. So, so welcome. Thanks again for your time. Talk to us. So you have a very, you made the leap into the industry, but your leap was in the marketing component of what we teach our students. So I think what you have to say and the kind of advice you're going to impart to everybody is important, because that is kind of a natural leap for students who are interested in the communications field, especially in the legal industry. So tell us what your day is like, how you got into it, and what life is like at Cooley.
Sure. So I definitely approached the legal industry differently than anybody else who's spoken so far. When I graduated J School, I was just looking for reporter positions. And I wound up at Law 360 initially as a news apprentice, which is basically their system for finding stories to cover. I was reading legal documents all day and looking for decisions, motions, new complaints that were interesting or had interesting parties, should be pitched and should be covered. And I did that for about a year before I was a general assignment reporter there, and I covered a few different beats. Native American law ended up being something I did a lot of towards the end, but environmental law, international trade, and anything that needed help that day. So I did that for almost 3 years, the reporting aspect. And I was there during a really interesting time in the newsroom. We were unionizing, so there were definitely some growing pains that were happening in terms of, I guess, work-life balance and expectations in terms of how many stories were being written a day. For the majority of the time that I was reporting, I was writing 4 stories a day. And granted, they were sometimes as short as 600 words, but it was still a lot to squeeze into hopefully 8 hours. It was never normally 8 hours. Yeah. I learned a lot. I had not dealt with legal documents before that. And they help you a lot with that training. Figuring out just basically how litigation works and what to look for in a document. Kind of like Sam was saying, there's always, it's always really gratifying when you're reading an opinion and a judge says something really sassy and you find it on page like 600, and to Leah's point about accuracy F, that was something I was going to mention. When you're covering litigation and your audience is lawyers, they don't like it when you get anything even slightly wrong. If they think you framed something incorrectly or misspelled any names, etc. So that was a really important skill to have learned in school that was very helpful for me there in terms of avoiding corrections as much as possible. And taught me to be very, very careful about everything I was doing on a daily basis. And yeah, after about 4 years there, I was starting to think about next steps, and I wasn't exactly sure what that looked like. For me, I was getting a little burnt out on reporting only. It was actually a very isolating reporting experience in the sense that the newsroom was very quiet and everyone had so much they were working on every day that there wasn't a lot of interaction on a daily basis with your coworkers, and things were just sort of siloed. And while we did connect, obviously, through unionizing, and I had great colleagues, I was just ready for something a little bit more varied. So I started thinking about it, and I actually got a message on LinkedIn from a recruiter, and I don't know if other people feel this way, but I always take any call that comes my way, because I think it's great practice and it's just good to be open to things. So I took the call about a content coordinator position at the time at an unnamed law firm. They don't tell you right away. And I was just trying to be open, but I also thought there was a very unlikely chance that I was going to be interested in it. I'm sure everyone knows there's sort of an interesting dynamic between journalism and communications, and each side has their own feelings about the other one. So I certainly had a lot of preconceived notions and had feelings about certain firms in particular and how they dealt with reporters based on how I was treated as one. So I didn't really go into it expecting to be highly interested in the job, but it was a very interesting phone call, and I ended up talking to the people that I now work with, and I was largely sold on the people. I have an incredible teammates and bosses, and it's a very supportive environment. So for me, it was a combination of looking for a change and maybe a little more work-life balance. Not to say that I don't work plenty now, but there's a little bit more control over your day, especially if you have something going on that you need to tend to. But also just the ability to do more than one thing a day. That's what I was really looking for. I think that in my time at Law 360, I figured out that I loved journalism school, but a lot of what I liked was working with other people at the Statesman, on the advisory board, and collaborating on things and having my hands in different buckets, so to speak. And there wasn't really an opportunity to be doing that in my reporting job. So on a daily basis, I use every single skill I use is something that I learned in J school. I'm writing external press releases and internal communications for leaders, and also for like our employee intranet, social media, working on long-term projects. Last year we even did a video series featuring some of our lawyers who are veterans, shot with iPhone, which is something that I did in J school. Thought about Phil a lot during that. I use our back end. We have Sitecore and SharePoint, and I was a web editor for the J School at the time on WordPress. So I, do a lot of futzing around in back ends, selecting photos and editing other people's work. I'm also on, we don't have like an official name for it, so it's called the super proofers, but it's basically just like people from the marketing department who are very good at copy editing and can look closely at documents that are going out to a wide audience. So I use a lot of copy editing skills, and I think that a lot of what I learned at Law 360 applies. I am sometimes writing about litigation, and that was really helpful, and learning how to take legalese and make it readable. But yeah, I mean, truly everything that I do is a J school skill. And I think attention to detail is, for me, the thing that has been most impactful for my career that I learned in school. And we actually hired someone a few months ago, and I was involved in interviewing and reviewing resumes and whatnot. And it's such a squishy skill. It's hard to determine, but just by meeting someone, whether they have attention to detail. But it's very difficult to find people who are good at that, and it's an extremely valuable skill to have. And I think that it serves me really well that I picked up tools on how to be that way.
Do you deal with the press at all, with the media?
A little bit, but we have we have a PR agency that does most of that. So it's actually interesting. I know that a lot of law firms aren't structured that way, and a lot of their communications and press PR teams are interacting with the media a lot more than I am. But sometimes we do get emails, but a lot of time it's filtered through our PR agency, our external PR agency.
And what's it like to be writing the press releases in terms of your experience? As a journalism student, is it much different, or?
It is really weird to write quotes for people. It just goes against like everything I learned for 4 years. It's not something that I was comfortable with initially. I think it's something you have to get better at as you do it, but it's just very out of body to do the first several times, because it's against what you learn, But that's really the major difference. Otherwise, I'm structuring releases with the same ideas that I would if I was writing a story. I would say that's the biggest difference.
Okay, and some of the drawbacks. Are there any drawbacks to what you're doing? It seems like you followed a very good lead from journalism school. Your skills from that to what you're doing now, and a lot of the skills that the students learn at SBU are very applicable to what you do.
Absolutely.
So in terms of any drawbacks, though, and do you see any drawbacks? I know you didn't think that this new job was going to work out, but you end up loving it, right? So
yeah, I think that like I said, I think that the team you're working with makes a big difference. I also think the culture of the company you join, whether it's a law firm or not, is something to think about. There are certainly big law firms that have reputations for not being very happy places to work, and others that do. So I think that was something that was important to me when I was job hunting in general, just thinking about the people that I'd be spending so much time with, and the environment. I mean, I think any job, you have some drawbacks. I mean, I work a lot some days, and sometimes you just want to like be done with email and no longer answering things.
right.
Lawyers are very interesting people sometimes. Some people have very specific approaches to things. So,
Yes.
but I think that's just like dealing with sources, right? Sometimes you have easier sources to interact with than others. So I don't think there's anything, I think there's a lot of opportunity if you're looking for a role in which you may be doing more than one thing and using the same skills that you're really interested in using. I think it's a great option if you decide that maybe you're a little burnt out or want to try something different.
Right. Well, my wife works at a firm with 85 lawyers, and she's the only marketing person. So you could probably fill in those blanks.
Yeah.
How big is your team?
So we have 6 people on my team, and we have 3,000 total staff, about 1,500 lawyers. It's a small team considering the amount of work we're doing.
Yes.
But we have a broader marketing department that does more like pitches and dealing with clients on a more specific basis than we do. But in terms of anything on our website or our back end or our internal communications, it's just the 6 of us doing.
How closely do you work with the attorneys on press releases or social media or whatever?
Usually they're just involved at the last step, approving what we've put together and giving any comments or feedback they may have. And whether or not we get a lot of feedback really depends on the lawyer and the topic. If they have their own color they want to add, or if we didn't have all the details to begin with, sometimes they help flesh it out. But usually we're given the information we need to take it 97% of the way there, and then they weigh in with feedback on releases and whatnot. In terms of social media, it's mostly interfacing with them on there, retweeting them and tagging them in posts that feature them, but they're not involved in the approvals necessarily.
How about LinkedIn? How do you help them?
We do. We have a lot of assets that help them set up an account if they don't have one, and we give them advice on what to put in there and correctly sized headshots, all that stuff. But I think that the degree to which our lawyers use their social media is very personal. We do encourage it, and LinkedIn is awesome in that sense, and I think a lot of people are more comfortable with it than Twitter. But we have some assets, to help them out, and they can always get in touch if they have questions.
Do you have them write articles for LinkedIn?
We do have a lot of thought leadership from our lawyers. That usually lives like on a blog on our website, or just as an insight item, and then they share it on there, or we do, depending on the item. But I don't actually think currently any of our lawyers write directly on LinkedIn for a blog. Okay.
Anything else you want to add before we go to questions? Anybody else? Awesome strategies and information. Thank you so much to our panelists. I'm opening it up to questions. So does anybody have any questions for any one of our panelists? Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a third year I'm going into my third year at Stony Brook. I'm interested in going to law school, and I'm wondering what what is some advice to do after graduation and before law school? And then also, this is kind of a two-part question, what to do in law school to kind of like make yourself stand out to future employers?
That's to all the panelists or
To
anybody?
everybody, yeah.
Okay,
A
good.
specific person.
Well, I know.
Yeah.
I know personally when I went into law school with respect to, you know, what to do when you get there. Your first year is just general courses. You're going to take constitutional law, legal writing, property, give you a lay of the land of just legal topics. I know that I definitely looked at a lot of different clubs that my law school had to kind of see what I was exactly interested in. I participated in our internal mock trial competition that led me down the path of being a litigator and eventually becoming an ADA. I know that my law school always preached show a demonstrated interest in something in particular. So if you want to be a criminal lawyer, if you're interested in IP, you know, you want to kind of center your studies around, once you get to your second and third year of law school, center your studies around classes that involve that particular topic. That law firms that do that specific thing that you're interested in. Prior to law school, obviously there's the Lsat. I know that some schools now take your GRE score. I personally do believe that the Lsat, having been so many years out from taking it, is actually a pretty good indicator. I couldn't understand it in law school, but after, it is a good indicator as to, you know, how well you'll do in law school, because it really is more about how does your brain work. Because I almost think that you have to have this sort of predisposed way of thinking when going into law school, and then they teach you how to think like a lawyer, which is something that you'll really only understand when you get into law school, because it's such a specific kind of way to think through things and be very analytical.
Yeah, so I guess I'll add on to that. I'm not sure if you were talking about like before law school as in things you could do. Like I know a lot of people take a gap year. My school, we had a lot of people that went straight through, so there were no gap years. But I think anything you can do, like if you're interested in working, I think anything you can do that will make you interesting to the school and to employers will be in your benefit. I did a lot of internships in undergrad, so I think like that was in my favor. But I think if I hadn't had any work experience, I think that would have worked against me, or at least it wouldn't, I wouldn't have had the opportunities I did. And I think like that opened a lot of doors for me being able to speak about those experiences. During law school, I had the mentality of if it doesn't, because like you go to law school for a job, you don't go to law school, like you don't get trained in a profession for the love of the art. Like you do it because you want to work in that field. So my mentality was like, I'm not doing anything if it doesn't benefit my goals and my career. So I joined, I think also like something a lot of people do, and I was pretty wary not to do, was I didn't just join things to join things. I didn't just like fluff my resume just to do it. So I was very strategic in what I did. So I joined like the IP Association. I mentioned I work with the media school. What else? Oh, I was the editor-in-chief of my school's IP journal. But I think what was interesting, so I was between going for the main journal or going for the IP journal, knowing that I wanted to do IP. And I found that the IP journal had a podcast, and it like that really helped me bring skills that other people didn't necessarily have. And like I was able to contribute more doing that. So I think like look for things that you can contribute to uniquely. I know this sounds like so repetitive and silly, but networking is so important. It truly, really is. I think it can save you the first year. My first year wasn't my greatest experience academically. I really tried my best. I couldn't say that I could have done better had I tried harder, but I think like networking really can carry you. So that is something I recommend.
I think that what you said about the first year, I think you're going to hear this a lot, which is that your first year is your most important in terms of grades. If you're going to a school and you're the type of student where you can sell out and get A's in your first year, you can really set yourself up for, you know, a Wilkie or a sort of a big law firm, and then you'll have that internship. And then if you don't, or you think that's outside your reach, all of these things are great. Leah mentioned a bunch of great things that you can do, and to the extent you don't know which field you want to direct yourself to, that's okay. I mean, feel free to join everything, and then, you know, narrow it down later, create different resumes, so that, you know, when you apply to an IP job, you know, you don't have the Employment Law Society on your resume. It doesn't matter. You know, they want to see IP law and media law and related fields on your resume. So being intentional about how you're presenting yourself to employers, I think also is very, very important.
And I think also more on a personal note, don't forget to do things you like. I think Leah alluded to it, like if you're going to suffer, you might as well suffer with people that you like. Definitely was the hardest thing I ever did. I thought 490 was awful, but this was significantly worse. And I think 490 prepared me well for that. But also, like, there are ways to get legal experience doing things you like. Like, so for example, my school it was called Outreach for Legal Literacy, and I went to a 5th grade class every week, and I taught kids about the law. So like, look for opportunities like that too, because there's room to have fun.
I'd love to hear what Pete has to say, because I know he's suffered through this also. And then I have something to add on to Sarah's question.
I was actually going to add, as far as both of your questions. So I think in law school, and this piggybacks on what Francesca just said. Also, by the way, I'm Pete. I graduated from Stony Brook with a journalism minor. Now I'm a litigation attorney at a complex litigation firm. So that's my background. But I think, you know, in terms of making yourself kind of useful and available, there's a lot of like clinical programs and pro bono programs that, you know, hopefully you'll have the opportunity later in your career to do that stuff too, but you will probably never have more time to do it than you do in law school, where you kind of get to make your own schedule. And as a student, you know, there's a lot of chances to really take on meaningful work that isn't available to students outside of that kind of pro bono context. So definitely don't shy away from that. Honestly, even if it's not totally geared toward what you're doing in the future, because it gets you kind of meaningful client-facing work to actually help people out, you know, well before you would ever have the chance to do so otherwise. And as far as the gap year question, so someone told me if you really want to go to law school, go straight through. And that's actually probably one of the pieces of advice that I've always come to question the most, which is not to say you shouldn't do it. Like if you're committed to it and you just know you want to get there because you can't wait to start being a lawyer, then by all means, you know, don't shy away from it. But also I think there's a big advantage, and even just from my kind of friend group, the friends I made in law school, I think, you know, a lot of the people that ended up with their careers in the best position the day of graduation are the ones that took 1 to 2 years and did some work. And I think so, you know, to the extent you're open-minded about doing that, certainly don't shy away from it, because I think everyone has a great deal of respect for people that have already, you know, done a full-time, you know, job and shown some acumen doing it, because then they know they're not taking a risk on someone who's only ever been a student, and are you going to be a good worker as you were a good student? Whereas, you know, someone that's already had a job for, you know, 1 to 2 years, gotten a promotion or something, you know, they know you've demonstrated the fact that you can show up to work every day. So hope that helps.
I was just going to share my son Nick's experience. He's now a second year associate at a big firm in Manhattan, WilmerHale. And when he graduated through a connection, he got a job as a paralegal at the Manhattan DA's office, and he did that for about a year and a half. And then he applied for some fellowships, and he got, and I know you both, Anna, you just graduated, and Sarah, you're both excellent students and very talented. So you might want to connect with, I can't think of her name right now, but I can send it to you separately, the woman at Stony Brook who handles all the fellowships and scholarships, like the Marshall, the Rhodes, Fulbrights, stuff like that. So he got a Marshall scholarship. He spent 2 years, got 2 master's degrees in England, and then went to law school. So, I mean, that's like not the typical gap experience, but it's a thing you can do and something you might think about. And Sarah, especially for you, because you're still in school, the woman who does the fellowships and scholarships is always looking for people she can kind of follow and lead, groom to go through these rigorous application processes. We did have our first Fulbright a few years ago, name also escaping me at the moment. Perhaps somebody else remembers. She went to Africa. Jessica Opatich, yes. And so, that's just another thing that you can do. And for my son, he was particularly interested in becoming a white collar crime prosecutor. So he got his master's degrees in one in economics and one in financial risk management. So of course, now with the change in federal administration, he is in private practice, but he hopes to eventually work for the Southern District of New York as a civil prosecutor. So that's his plan.
And I think going back to the point that Francesca made, when you're in law school, if it's not something that's going to advance your goals, don't bother doing it, because that's so true, because you have such a limited time in law school. You have all the time in the world because you aren't making your schedule, but it's only 3 years. And that 3 years flies by before you know it. And I think the one thing from Shay's school that I really kept in mind is this idea of branding yourself. How are you going to pitch yourself to employers, because it is so competitive, and you have to make yourself as marketable as possible. I almost think that you could even use your 490 project as a foundational, as a starting point when you're writing your law school applications and doing the essays that they require you to do with respect to why do you want to go to law school, or whatever questions they have now. And I would say about 490, if I had to live in a Groundhog's Day where 490 was like my everyday, I could do that rather than going back to law school and having to suffer through those 3 years and the bar exam. 490 was just like piece of cake in retrospect.
Wow.
This is building off Leah's point again, which is building off my point, but I just come to think of it. I had a friend, like in terms of branding yourself in law school, I had a friend who from the start, she knew she wanted to do med-mal defense. Think what you will of it, but everything she did was family law, mediation, just like advocacy for groups that don't really have a voice. And then when she was going for jobs, they were like, you want to do med-mal defense? That doesn't add up. So I think, like she had the best intentions of signing up for a lot of different things and trying things. I think it backfired on her a little bit. So I think you have to be very intentional, because I think people pay attention to every single move you make, or they take it as disingenuous in the end.
Going off what Francesca said earlier about groups, about networking, does anybody have any tips for our students in terms of, and I know it's tough now with what's going on with face-to-face meetings, but anybody have any tips on organizations or groups that our students could take advantage of to ease them into the industry at all, or?
I think if you're interested in media law, or even if you're not, I think the Student Press Law Center is super great for bridging the gap between journalism students and lawyers. Like I said, I just finished my summer media law and policy institute with them, but they're super, so part of the class that I was involved with had undergraduate journalism students in it. So I think they're always looking for ways to involve undergraduate journalism students. Also, the American Bar Association Forum on Communications Law is super great as well. I think there's a media law bar in New York that I think would be super helpful to students, but just network a lot. And like, I cringe saying that because I hated hearing it from people, but it's true. I think when I was looking for a job, I met with like 2 to 3 people a day, if it was not in person or by phone call, like every day of the week. So.
I just want to echo that. I think I hated hearing like network from people, but it's just so important. And, you know, I'll take this opportunity. I think Francesca's already added me on LinkedIn, but add everyone here on LinkedIn. Reach out to Stony Brook alum. Your law school will have, you know, many alumni in whatever industry that you want to be in. There will be, you know, a local sort of like city bar association. There will be a state bar association, you know, wherever you're going, and they'll have student memberships, you know, in addition to just all of the different student organizations at your school will have, there will be panels, and you'll be able to talk to the speakers at the panels, but take advantage of all those opportunities. I think I tried to, and you know, make meaningful connections too. It's not just, you know, don't just send the LinkedIn invitation, or, you know, follow up and you know, meet for coffee when that's something that we do. Again, I tried to talk to at least like one person for, you know, more than 30 seconds at basically every event that I went to. So that way, you know, that was somebody who I'd actually connected with at this event, panel, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Good advice. Networking is crucial to the path in your career. Does anyone know of any interning opportunities in the legal field for that would apply to our students?
The the Student Press Law Center has a undergraduate journalism internship, I believe.
Okay, that's good.
Can I ask like a more specific question? Do you guys know of anything? Oh, sorry, I'm Anna. I just graduated, and I'm interested in like advocacy and like human rights. That's kind of like what I've been doing for like the last 4 years. That's my go-to, but I don't know where to go with that. That's the type of guidance I need. I know there's human rights law, but then I don't think you can't just like jump into that. I feel like I want like some type of experience. A lot of the places I was looking at like right before COVID, like I don't even think they're offering positions per se for like entry level. So that's what I'm struggling with. They're just looking for like filling in those like type of positions that are like higher up. So, I know it's like really specific, you know, geared, but yeah.
No, it's a good question. I know it's a lot of people. I think, you know, when you first go to law school, or you want to, just in journalism school too, you want to change the world, right? That's why we do it. A lot of firms, especially the larger firms, I think aiming to practice at a large firm as your first job out of law school is like the best idea. It's not going to happen for everyone, but you open a lot of different doors that way. And it's not just sort of doors for your career down the road, but also in terms of what you can actually do on a day-to-day basis. So firms like I used to work at Kilpatrick Townsend has a really big pro bono practice. So even though, you know, day to day you're doing, you know, litigation on behalf of the corporation, and it's not, you know, what you kind of imagined you'd be doing, you're building your skills there. And then also you can take on projects where you're taking on the prison industrial complex or whatever your chosen issue is. You know, firms do that work. And so that's why I think getting into a big firm in particular is the best way to transition eventually into one of those jobs. And it could also mean, you know, you're doing litigation and then later on you do, you know, prosecutor work or whatever.
Thank you.
And getting back to networking, you know, that's another, like LinkedIn. I don't know if I'm friends with her on LinkedIn, but George and I both know a former Newsday reporter named Lena Taylor, who's been working for Human Rights Watch for many, many years now. She covers the Arabian Peninsula for Human Rights Watch and uses a lot of her journalism skills for that. So like, that's somebody you could connect with through, you know, through one of us and have a Zoom coffee or something and ask her about her experience. She was one of these people who was a rock critic at one time and then is now, you know, just life is strange. And I also wanted to mention another person to network with, and just as an interesting tidbit, many of you took media law with Carolyn Levin. And I just read Mary Trump's book, and Carolyn is credited right at the top of the acknowledgements for vetting Mary Trump's book, Too Much and Not Enough. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think that
go ahead.
one thing that's really important that is something we learn in J school is that you kind of make your own opportunities. And I think that's the mindset you also have to go into law school with, is making your own opportunities, which comes through doing the work to network, which is a skill we already have as journalists, because we're always trying to find sources and get sources for stories. Just to tie it back into how they're so interrelated, you know, the journalism field and the legal field. The J School has a wonderful alumni network. And when I was in J School and even now, there's never been one person that has not wanted to help someone. And I think that when you're looking for law schools, you have to look for a law school that has that type of alumni network as well. Because I know for the law school I went to St. John's, that was the biggest draw for me. They always harped on their alumni network, and you know, they were pretty accurate with how helpful it was. They were always having events, bringing alums in to speak to students. And for the students who took advantage of that, they made the opportunities for themselves. Sometimes, you know, you can go to events in law school and meet an alum who ends up getting you an internship somewhere. Or that could be the person that becomes a mentor for you, that might know someone that, you know, at the end of your time at law school, you get a job because of that one person you met in your first year of law school. So I know everyone is harping on networking, but it is so wildly important in both the journalism field and in the legal field as well.
Going off what Leah said about making your own opportunities, looking back at this was a little bit bold, and I don't know where it came from in me, but I was networking with someone from the Reporters Committee, and he was a lawyer for them, and I just asked, like, do you have any positions? Like, can I remotely, because I go to school, I went to school in Indiana, they're in DC, and he literally made a research position for me. So you just got to ask, and like, what's the worst they could say is no. That's the same thing with sources. You just got to go out there and do it. So I think that was bold. I don't know where it came from, but it worked. So.
Good. Anybody else have any other questions? Sarah.
I have one last question. I am going back and forth between, do I want to enter as like an attorney, or do I want to like use a law degree for like investigative reporting or something like that? What do you think that if I ended up going back into the journalism field, that law school, like what the things that you learn from law school would be like useful, or should I just like go in a completely another direction if journalism is where I want to end up?
So I have a really funny anecdote about that. When I interned at CBS News, I got to meet Jeff Glore. And at the time, he was one of like my absolute favorite reporters at CBS. So I was completely fangirling. And he was asking me what I was going to do after journalism school. And I was like, I'm going to go to law school. Because at the time, I had it in my head that I was going to go to law school and get back into journalism after. And he said to me, do you really need to go to law school to do that? And obviously it's kind of devastating when like someone that you look up to is like questioning your life choices. But in hindsight, I'm almost glad that he did that, because it really made me take a step back and sort of prioritize and see what I really wanted to do And I think that being all of these years out now, if journalism is something that you think you still want to be involved in, and using your a law degree in order to do investigative journalism or something along those lines, stay involved in the industry is my biggest word of advice, because if you stay involved, you'll always have those contacts, and it'll assist in guiding you to that end goal of kind of making it full circle with going back into law. Journalism. I didn't do that, which proved to be very difficult trying to hop back into the field because I had no contacts. And there were very few people that, kind of believed that I was being genuine when I said that I wanted to leave the legal field and go back into journalism, because nothing that I did throughout law school and even being an ADA showed that I was still interested in journalism. So if law school is kind of just a thing you want to sort of, market yourself better when, if you want to do investigative journalism, going on 48 hours or something like that, working for a show like that, stay involved within the field. I can't harp on that enough.
Sarah, also, you'll find a lot of media outlets are always looking for journalists who have a legal background. They could become, the legal reporters or the investigative reporters, whatever. So, you can do that kind of as a boomerang. So that also works. Does anybody else have, we only have a few more minutes. Any other last questions, or any of our panelists want to add something that they forgot to add? Okay. If not, Barbara, is there a way to share some of the contacts with the participants? I know we put together a doc with emails and.
Well, when I send around the link to the recording, I'll include a link to the document, which has everybody's email on it, I think. And Sam and Pete, thank you for your contributions and for joining us. And if you don't mind, I'll add your email addresses to that document also, since you were participated here. And I have checked the analytics on the recordings for these past sessions, and they do get watched. So we've had up to 75 views of some of the past workshops that we've done. So thanks to everybody for making yourselves available, for joining in, and for asking good questions. And as always, great to see you all.
Same here. Great to see everybody. Leah, good to see you. Sarah, good to see you. Anna, everybody, thank you so much for your time. And please stay safe and be well.